If you ever find yourself seriously considering purchasing matching his and hers recliners, take a step back and reevaluate your life. That's what I should have done. Instead, I stood in that oversized warehouse with Sharon by my side, her flipping through fabric samples like she was picking paint colors for the Sistine Chapel, and I thought, yeah, this is good. We're settling in. We're comfortable. Comfortable, as it turns out, is a synonym for clueless. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't some love-struck sap blinded by romance. I'm a grown man. I know marriages don't age like wine. They age more like milk. Still, I figured Sharon and I were doing okay. We had a rhythm. She did her morning yoga that made the living room smell like eucalyptus and quiet judgment, and I went to work at the distribution center where boxes are respected more than people. We had our weekly trivia nights with friends we both barely tolerated, and we had our arguments over thermostat settings like any respectable middle-aged couple. Life wasn't thrilling, but it was fine. And if fine sounds like a warning siren to you, then congrats, you're smarter than me. The whole thing started, or rather ended, on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are important. They're not dramatic like Mondays or hopeful like Fridays. They're unassuming. They sneak up on you, wearing khakis and holding a clipboard. And that's when your life crumbles on a clipboard Tuesday. It was a regular morning. I was finishing a bowl of cereal that bragged about having more fiber than a phone book, and Sharon was pacing the dining room, pretending not to be pacing. She was on the phone, which wasn't unusual. Sharon could spend 4 hours on a call about a throw pillow. But this one was different. She was using her customer service voice. You know the one. Sweet, floaty, and full of fake concern. Except the call ended with, "All right, I'll tell him," which wasn't something she usually said after talking about home decor. I looked up. "Tell me what?" "Oh," she said, glancing around like the ceiling tiles might hold the answer. "That my mom wants us to visit her next weekend." That was a lie. Sharon's mother lived in Phoenix and hated both humidity and me. She hadn't invited us anywhere since the Great Thanksgiving Gravy incident of 2016. But I didn't press. If there's one thing I've learned after 11 years of marriage, it's that you don't win arguments by actually arguing. You just store them quietly in your mental glove box until the day you really need them. And then came the anniversary card. You see, Sharon and I had this running joke. We'd never remember our anniversary. Not because we didn't care, but because we were both terrible with dates. One year we both forgot it entirely, went out for tacos, and toasted to Happy Whoops. That's just who we were. Low maintenance. Unsentimental. Efficient. So imagine my surprise when I opened the hall closet and found a card. It was tucked behind the stack of maybe one day picture frames and a decorative bowl full of mystery keys. The card was unsealed and addressed in handwriting that, frankly, I would have bet my 401k didn't belong to Sharon. For starters, it had hearts on it. Sharon doesn't do hearts. She once said hearts look like the emoji version of indigestion. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I should have just shoved the closet shut, gone back to the kitchen, and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But no, I pulled it out. Inside, there was a message that began with, "You make me feel seen in ways I forgot existed." Which, first of all, if someone ever says that to you, check your bank account. It's either a love letter or the beginning of a pyramid scheme. The letter was signed, simply, M. No full name. Just M. Like a Bond villain. Or, worse, someone who knows he's messing with another man's wife and has the gall to go minimalist about it. I reread it. Twice. Then a third time, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood some artistic attempt at poetry. I hadn't. It was clear. Sharon had received a handwritten, romantic message from someone who wasn't me, and had chosen to hide it in the same closet where we kept spare light bulbs and expired batteries. Now, I could have done the normal thing. You know, ask her. Sit her down. Use my calm voice. "Sharon, dear, who's M, and why does he feel seen?" But something about the whole thing just insulted me. Not the cheating itself, I mean, yes, that was a blow, but the effortlessness of it. The lazy hiding spot. The hallmark tone of the letter. If you're going to betray me, at least put some creativity into it. So, I made a decision. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell or demand explanations. I waited. I let her go on pretending life was normal. I let her pick what to watch on Netflix, even though I knew she was lying about liking documentaries on competitive quilting. I played the part of the doting husband, smiling when she mentioned how busy her Tuesday evenings had become. And I started looking. Not at her phone. Not at her emails. I didn't even need a private investigator. No. I looked at her calendar. Sharon is meticulous with her planning. She keeps a physical calendar on the fridge, color-coded, no less. Her schedule is a kaleidoscope of Pilates, meetings, brunches, and the occasional vague catch-up. But every other Thursday? There it was. A recurring note. Just one word, written in green pen. Book club. Now here's the thing. Sharon doesn't read. Her idea of a book is an article online about skincare myths, and even that she'll skim. But every other Thursday, like clockwork, she'd put on her book club sweater and vanish for 3 hours. So I followed her. Not in a trench coat and sunglasses. I'm not a cartoon. I just happened to take the same route, 20 minutes after she left. I was expecting to find a group of women sipping wine and faking opinions about something they didn't read. Instead, I found Sharon sitting in a parked car in front of a high school baseball field, talking to a man who looked like he owned a collection of Bluetooth earpieces and once called a bartender chief. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. But the way she looked at him, I knew. And you know what my first thought was? Book club, I thought. At least pick a more believable cover story. Who the hell meets up with a man to talk about books unless they're actually into books? Then I laughed. Right there, in my car, across the parking lot. I laughed like a lunatic. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. I mean, Sharon? The woman who once called Shakespeare a bit much? Cheating under the banner of book club? It was almost art. And just like that, the rage went out of me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel heartbroken. I just felt done. Like I'd reached the end of a very long novel that turned out to be a cookbook. I didn't confront her that night either. Or the next. I let her have her fake Thursdays, her green pen lies, her literary illusions. Because I had a plan. And it wasn't violent. It wasn't messy. It was, in fact, deliciously quiet. Sharon and I had this unspoken agreement. She pretended I didn't notice things, and I pretended not to notice her pretending. It kept the wheels turning. Like when she accidentally double-booked our anniversary dinner with her wellness circle. You'd think a group with the word circle in its name would know how to include people, but apparently I was shaped wrong for entry. So she went, and I ate leftovers shaped like disappointment. Still, the marriage was alive, if by alive we meant quietly congealing. Now, ever since the book club revelation, where Sharon, who had once called Dr. Seuss wordy, was allegedly attending bi-weekly critiques of literature, I had decided that I was done being the passive half of this tragic sitcom. But that didn't mean I was going to storm into her lie with fists and accusations. No, I was going to do what every bored suburban husband with a slight grudge and too much access to office supplies would do. I was going to collect data. I started small, observational. Sharon was very into precision when it came to her lies. If she said she'd be home at 8:10, she would arrive at 8:09 and hover outside in the driveway until the minute flipped. She must have read somewhere that specificity is the key to believability. To her credit, it worked. Until it didn't. I kept a spreadsheet. Not because I'm petty. Because I'm organized. Book club days. Entry times. Outfits. Whether her eyeliner was winged, which she usually reserved for pretending to be interested in something. Over 3 weeks, I had more data on her evenings than the IRS had on my tax filings. I even created bar graphs. They were color-coded. Sharon would have been impressed if she wasn't busy organizing fiction with some man who probably wore zip-up mock turtlenecks. Then came the fundraiser. The fundraiser was for a local community center she'd never stepped foot in. A flyer appeared on the fridge one morning, bright orange, full of clip art people holding hands. Sharon pointed it out like it was something that had just popped up, and she might help with. She used that tone where every word is dipped in suggestion and lightly sprinkled with guilt. "It's good to give back," she said, while sipping coffee like she was auditioning for a pamphlet on empathy. I nodded. Absolutely. Nothing says charity like watching adults try to outbid each other on homemade cupcakes. She smiled tightly. Sharon hated being mocked, especially when she knew it was deserved. She spent the next hour trying to act casual, which in her case meant moving the fridge magnets around like she was performing strategic military maneuvers. She eventually left for the fundraiser, dressed like a mannequin from a business casual clearance rack, and carrying nothing but her purse and the weight of plausible deniability. So I waited. Not in a car across the street. Please. I had something better. Sharon had forgotten that our printer, the one she insisted we buy during the home office refresh, was connected to our shared email. It wasn't even hidden, just buried under all the subscription notices and important information about your credit score emails she never opened. That night, I printed every email involving the fundraiser. There were only 2. One was a mass forward. The other was from a guy named Miles, subject line, confirming details. That name rang no bells, but the email did. In it, Miles thanked Sharon for reserving the same spot and mentioned that he'd bring the book again just in case. There it was. Her brilliant disguise had come full circle. She was recycling lies. She didn't even bother upgrading the alias. Same time, same place, same Miles, same nonsense. Now, if I were a rational man, I'd have stopped there. But no, I wanted to be thorough. I created a fake Facebook account. Don't judge me. This wasn't catfishing. This was reconnaissance. The profile picture was a generic beach at sunset, and the name was Ray Morris, which I chose because it sounded like someone who'd wear loafers without socks. I joined the fundraisers group page, commented on a few posts, liked someone's photo of raffle baskets, and waited. Within a day, I was in. Apparently, Miles was not only part of the fundraiser, he was the literary advisor. His profile picture was him holding a copy of Catcher in the Rye like it owed him money. Every third post of his was a quote misattributed to Hemingway. He also had a public photo album titled Mindful Moments, which featured 5 separate shots of his legs crossed in folding chairs. This was my rival. Now, here's the best part. Buried in the comments of one of his Literary Reflections posts, where he mused about the tragic honesty of flawed characters, yes, really, was a reply from Sharon. Except she wasn't using her full name. Just a Sam, which is either a desperate attempt at discretion or her version of a pen name. Either way, they weren't exactly being cryptic. Their banter included lines like, "You always know how to turn a phrase," and "Glad we're continuing our story." I stared at that line. Continuing our story. They were writing a novel, apparently. Genre, midlife melodrama. Plot, betrayal, mediocrity, folding chairs. I closed the laptop and thought, well, George, what now? There are 2 kinds of people in situations like this. Some blow up the house and go out in a blaze of emotional glory. Others just quietly move a few things out of place and wait for the world to tilt. I'm the second kind. So I did what any self-respecting betrayed husband with a label maker and a penchant for slow burn revenge would do. I got methodical. First, I edited our shared calendar. I added my own event on the same night as the next fundraiser meeting. It was titled Dentist Appointment, George, and I made sure it repeated every Thursday for a month. It wouldn't be suspicious. Just boring enough to be ignored. And it'd give me time. Next, I ordered a custom bookmark. On one side, it said, "You make me feel seen in ways I forgot existed." On the other, I printed Sharon's email signature. It arrived 2 days later, sleek and innocent looking. The following Thursday, I casually asked Sharon where my navy jacket was. She told me to check the hall closet. I did. I found it. And then I slipped the bookmark into the inside pocket. See, Sharon had taken to borrowing that jacket sometimes when it got cool in the evenings. She liked how broken in it was. She said it felt authentic. I figured if anything felt authentic in our house, it might as well carry a message. The next time she left, she wore the jacket. I sat at home, eating cereal and watching reruns of a cooking show where people panicked over risotto. The bookmark was out there. Miles would find it. Or Sharon would. Or both. And neither of them would know if it was a mistake or a statement. Which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want them to explode. I wanted them to wonder. Because Sharon? Sharon didn't like uncertainty. She liked control. She liked being the one with the hidden calendar and the 2-hour discussions about literature with a man whose favorite book was probably whatever made him sound the most profound at potlucks. And me? I just wanted her to feel off balance for once. Just slightly. Just enough. So when she came home that night, exactly at 8:10, as always, I didn't ask questions. I didn't search her purse or check her phone. I looked up from the couch and said, "How was the fundraiser?" She blinked. "It was fine. Productive." I nodded. "Glad to hear it. You look thoughtful." She didn't know what to say to that. Which was the point. She walked past me, slower than usual. I turned up the volume on the TV. The risotto had failed. Someone was crying over undercooked scallops. And me? I just watched, spoon in hand, living my new quiet version of sabotage. Let her guess. Let Miles guess. Let the story continue, one unread chapter at a time. Sharon has always had this habit of narrating her own life like it's a mid-budget indie film. She'll sigh before saying things that don't need sighs. She pauses dramatically, even when asking where the remote is. She once called a cracked coffee mug a symbol of how time wears us down. It was a mug from a gas station. Not even a good one. The kind you get free with 10 gallons of unleaded. I think it used to say good vibes before the letters peeled off. But there she was, holding it like it was the Holy Grail and we were living in a deleted scene from someone's senior thesis film. So, naturally, when I left the bookmark in my jacket, I assumed it would trigger something. A panic, maybe. A stammered excuse. At minimum, a raised eyebrow and some vague attempt at deflection. But the next morning? Nothing. She breezed into the kitchen like it was any other Friday. She poured her coffee, skimmed the headlines, and asked if we were still planning to fix the garage light over the weekend. Sharon doesn't like broken things hanging around. Ironic, given the circumstances. I played along. Nodded. Said something about picking up a replacement bulb. And that was it. Nothing. Not even a flicker of suspicion on her face. It almost annoyed me. I wanted acknowledgement. A pause. Something. But Sharon was nothing if not committed to her role. If pretending was an Olympic sport, she'd have a medal and a sponsorship deal by now. So, I adjusted. Moved on to the next step. That weekend, I went into the garage, stared at the faulty light fixture for about 3 minutes, then walked back out. It was never about the light anyway. I went to the old file cabinet in the corner, the one with outdated warranties, appliance manuals for things we didn't own anymore, and exactly 3 tax returns I hadn't gotten around to shredding, and started digging. I found what I was looking for in the second drawer, a stack of notepads Sharon used to hoard from various community events. One of them had a logo from some failed organic soap company. Perfect. I tore off the logo page, wrote down a short message, nothing dramatic, and slid it into her tote bag when she wasn't looking. The note said, "It's funny what people leave behind." That was it. Just vague enough to be haunting, just direct enough to mess with her. She found it Monday morning. I heard her unzip the tote as she was packing for work. There was a pause. A real one this time. Then the paper rustled. I didn't look up. I kept sipping my coffee like a man who just discovered a new hobby. Passive-aggressive paper drops. She didn't say a word. Just tossed the tote over her shoulder and left. That was progress. The next 2 days were uneventful. Sharon acted normal in that overly practiced way people do when they're very much not normal. She asked about dinner like she hadn't read a cryptic note 2 days earlier. She commented on a neighbor's Halloween decorations like she wasn't in the middle of what was probably her worst episode of Choose Your Own Lie. But Wednesday morning, the real twist showed up. I got a message at work from a number I didn't recognize. No, hello, no pleasantries. Just, we should talk. If you know, then let's clear it up like adults. First of all, anyone who opens with, like adults, is about to say something stupid. Secondly, I hadn't given this number to anyone, which meant someone had gone digging. I replied with, new phone. Who dis? A minute later, it's Miles. Don't play games. Oh, Miles. The literary genius of folding chairs and vague compliments. So now he was texting me directly. Bold move. Almost cute. I waited 2 hours to reply. Not because I was busy. I just wanted him to feel the kind of anxious dread that pairs well with overconfidence. When I finally responded, I wrote, "You seem confused. Sharon's never mentioned you." He didn't reply for a while. And when he did, it was exactly what I expected. She said this might happen. She didn't want it to get messy. Messy. That was the word. As if he'd spilled a drink. As if the situation could be cleaned up with a few paper towels and a firm apology. I didn't respond. I figured letting him squirm was more efficient than anything I could write. That evening, Sharon made pasta. Which was unusual. She hates pasta. Says it's empty calories with a superiority complex. But there it was on the table. Fettuccine, overcooked, drowning in a sauce that tasted like regret and grocery store loyalty discounts. I took a bite. Chewed slowly. Interesting choice, I said. She smiled a little too brightly. Thought we'd mix things up. You okay? I asked. You seem focused. Just tired. Long day. I nodded. Anyone new at work? She shook her head. Same people. Same drama. Must be exhausting, all that consistency. She gave me a look. The kind that said, if I admit anything, I'll lose control of the narrative. And Sharon does not lose control of the narrative. Not willingly. That night, she went to bed early. I stayed up, scrolling through my phone, wondering if Miles was drafting his next great text. He didn't send anything. Probably consulting his thesaurus. The next morning, she left a sticky note on the fridge. Pick up toothpaste. We're out. That was it. No hearts. No smiley face. Just toothpaste. Practical. Unsentimental. Efficient. I added another note underneath it. Mine said, also, pick up truth. We seem low. I didn't wait for her reaction this time. I left for work before she came back into the kitchen. I figured, let the notes speak for themselves. Let her wonder how many I'd leave before one of them finally said what we both knew. That evening, she was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The loaded kind. The kind that makes you feel like you walked into a meeting halfway through and everyone knows something you don't. Or, in this case, something you very much do. She cleared her throat once. Then again. Then didn't say anything. Pasta again tonight? I asked. No, she said. Thought I'd order in. Good call. That last batch tasted like a confession. She looked up, eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged. Nothing. Just remembering the taste. She didn't reply. Just pulled out her phone and stared at it like it might offer instructions. Maybe Miles had stopped being poetic. Maybe he was starting to panic. Thursday arrived, and with it, her standard book club routine. Same departure time. Same soft clatter of heels. Same forced smile as she waved goodbye. I waved back. Then walked straight to the hall closet, pulled out the calendar, and made one small addition. I circled the next book club night and wrote beside it, final chapter. Not because I planned on confronting her. Not because I had a speech prepared. But because I was tired of playing chess with someone who thought she was still hiding the board. Let her keep pretending. Let Miles stew in his quiet little corner. Let Sharon chew on notes and bookmarks like they were breadcrumbs in some mystery she couldn't solve. The next move wasn't about catching anyone. It was about setting the stage. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted a finale. And it was almost time. There's something satisfying about watching a liar work too hard. It's like seeing someone try to cut a steak with a spoon. They get there eventually, but you can't help but notice how ridiculous it looks. Sharon had hit that phase. Over the past week, she transformed into a domestic overachiever. Laundry done without prompting. Curtains washed for no reason. Even the junk drawer had been organized, which, in our house, was the equivalent of someone renovating a landfill. She asked me 3 times in one day if I wanted to repaint the hallway. We hadn't painted the hallway since we moved in, mostly because it was beige and boring and neither of us cared enough. But now, suddenly, Sharon cared deeply about beige. That's when I knew things were slipping for her. Guilt makes people creative. And Sharon, bless her, was nothing if not ambitious when it came to maintaining illusions. If she put this much effort into our marriage 5 years ago, we might have had an interesting hallway and a few decent conversations. Miles had gone quiet, which was disappointing. I had hoped he'd send another one of his earnest little messages so I could ignore it with flair. Instead, he'd vanished, possibly because Sharon had realized how fool it was to involve a man whose greatest contribution to humanity was a Facebook post about how real men read fiction. The final chapter was circled on the fridge calendar like a little inside joke between me and me. Sharon never acknowledged it. She saw it, though. I watched her eyes land on it while she stood in front of the fridge, pretending to be baffled by yogurt expiration dates. She didn't ask about it. Just quietly peeled off the sticky note I'd left the day before. Most endings aren't a surprise. They just show up late. That Thursday, she didn't wear her usual book club sweater. She put on something new, business casual, with a coat that looked a little too clean. I figured that was supposed to throw me off. Make it seem like she was actually attending something official. I didn't ask. I wished her a pleasant evening. She blinked twice like I'd spoken in another language, then left. Here's where things got fun. I didn't follow her. That's what she'd expect. She probably rehearsed a speech in case I popped up at whatever location Miles was playing pretend at. But I wasn't interested in theatrics. I had logistics to handle. I drove to the print shop 2 blocks away. The guy behind the counter was the kind who looked like he'd been tricked into adulthood. I handed him a USB stick and asked him to print 30 copies of the file labeled Sharon Memo. Black and white. Stapled. He didn't ask questions, just tapped at the keyboard with the enthusiasm of someone processing parking tickets. 10 minutes later, I had a stack of papers that looked incredibly dull, deliberately so. Boring font, plain layout, no drama. Just quotes. Direct ones. From Sharon's emails and texts. I'd made sure they were the kind that sounded like lines from a budget self-help book. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm not performing. And George has no idea. He just lives around me. I even threw in the one where she called our life a couch with no cushions. That one made me laugh more than it should have. I dropped the stack into a plain manila envelope, wrote for the circle on the front, and drove over to the local community center where Sharon's alleged book club had apparently hosted 1 or 2 real events. I handed the envelope to the front desk volunteer and told her it was for the Thursday night reading group. She didn't ask questions. No one ever does when you're polite and slightly vague. By the time Sharon got home, the envelope was probably already causing at least one awkward silence and two premature exits. She walked in at 8:07, 3 minutes early. That alone told me things hadn't gone according to her very carefully designed blueprint. Her hair looked too neat. Her coat was folded over her arm instead of hanging from the hook. Her shoes were off before she stepped onto the rug. Little signs. Panic and polite packaging. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a catalog I had no intention of buying anything from. Just pictures of patio furniture we didn't need and wind chimes we'd never hang. She stood in the doorway for a second too long. "You're back early," I said, not looking up. She exhaled through her nose. "Yeah, it wrapped up sooner than expected. Short book. Funny." I nodded. "Anything worth recommending?" She hesitated. "No, not really." Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The calculating kind. I flipped a page. "You all right? You look like someone told you your favorite soap got discontinued." She sat down across from me. Not beside me. Across. A position that said she wanted control of the conversation but hadn't figured out what the conversation was yet. "George," she said carefully, "has anything been bothering you lately?" "What, like allergies?" She rolled her eyes, but there wasn't any conviction in it. "I mean, between us." I shrugged. "Not especially. Just curious what book you guys are pretending to read these days." There it was. The moment. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and she knew. Knew I knew. Knew I had known. Knew the charade had been propped up on toothpicks and dry sarcasm for longer than it ever deserved. She tried the gentle route. "I know things have felt distant." "Sure. Ever since the couch lost its cushions." Her face froze for half a second. Then her eyes narrowed, and she said nothing. That was the real confession. Not a tearful apology. Not a shaky monologue about lost passion or complicated feelings. Just that look. The one that said she'd been caught and didn't know which version of herself to pivot to next. "I don't want to fight," she said finally. "Great," I said, standing up. "Me neither." I walked past her into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "Are you going to say anything?" she asked behind me. I sipped the water. "Already did." "That's it." "Sharon," I said, "you wrote your version." "I just printed it." She didn't ask what that meant. I think, deep down, she already knew. Later that night, she went to bed early again. I stayed up. The catalog was still open on the page with the overpriced garden lanterns. I closed it, set it aside, and wrote another sticky note. This one said, "Truth makes terrible decor, but eventually it finds a shelf." I stuck it on her car window. Then I went to sleep. Not peacefully, not triumphantly, but without pretending. The thing about endings is nobody likes to admit they're happening. People don't mind a little drifting, a few skipped dinners, the occasional silence that feels like someone pressed mute on the relationship. But the second you say it out loud, "This is ending," everyone gets very dramatic, as if you've just suggested we cut the power to the entire neighborhood. Sharon, in her usual fashion, was trying to pivot into the "let's be reasonable adults" phase. That meant carefully constructed sentences, lots of measured blinking, and pausing just long enough after every third word to seem reflective. I let her have her moment. She earned at least that much after a year of imaginary book club meetings and email poetry exchanges with a man who once used the phrase emotional alignment in a sentence. It had been 2 days since the envelope incident. She hadn't mentioned it. That was her approach to crisis management. Pretend the fire isn't real unless the smoke gets into the laundry. And since no one had knocked on our door with torches and questions, she decided everything must still be under control. She took Friday off work, which was rare. Sharon doesn't take days off unless she's sick, and even then, she works from the couch with tissues and martyrdom. So when she announced she'd be home to reset, I knew what that really meant. She was finally going to try and steer the ship before it drifted too far into the land of consequences. I came home to a living room that had been refreshed, as she liked to call it. The furniture hadn't moved, but every cushion had been fluffed within an inch of its life, and the coffee table had been wiped down with something lemon-scented. I walked in, kicked off my shoes, and noticed she was already sitting there, legs crossed, a notepad in her lap. A notepad. As if we were about to go over quarterly performance goals. I sat across from her and waited. No small talk. No fake smiles. Just waiting. She took a breath like she was preparing to recite a warranty policy. "I think we've both been feeling things we haven't said." I nodded. Yeah, I've been feeling allergic to nonsense. She blinked, took it on the chin. Good. We were making progress. I'm not here to defend anything, she said. I just want to understand where we go from here. That was interesting phrasing. We, as in still a team. Here, as in this exact weird little emotional stalemate. She was hoping to frame it like a weather pattern we'd both been caught in. As if she hadn't been the one forecasting sunshine while texting storm warnings to Miles. Where we go? I repeated. That depends. You bringing Miles? She winced. It was quick, like when you stub your toe but try not to look embarrassed. That's not fair. Oh, so we're measuring fairness now. Fantastic. Want me to get a whiteboard? I made a mistake, she said. No, you made a schedule. Big difference. She put the notepad down, which felt symbolic in a very uninteresting way. George, she said, leaning forward, I know you're angry. Not really, I said. I passed angry about 3 weeks ago. Right now, I'm just fascinated by how far you were willing to go to keep pretending I didn't exist. That's not true, isn't it? You made a whole second life. Emails, excuses, fake events. You know what I did during those hours? Laundry. Paid bills. Replaced the leaky faucet you said was making you anxious. And you? You were out doing your best impression of a woman who didn't live here. She didn't respond. Just sat there, adjusting her sleeve like it held the solution. I want to make it right, she said finally. That's going to be difficult, I replied. Because you're not sure what you're fixing. You don't even know what broke. I know I hurt you. You hurt a version of me you didn't care about anymore. Let's not get sentimental about it. There was a pause. A long one. Long enough for me to look over at the bookshelf and wonder if any of the titles had actually been opened since the Obama administration. Then she said, so what now? That was it. The big question. The finale. Except it didn't feel dramatic. It felt like someone asking which aisle paper towels are in. I don't want to fight, she added. Good, I said. Because we're not having one. She looked at me like she didn't quite believe it. I'm not staying, I continued. But I'm not storming out either. That's your style. Dramatic exits. Unexpected entries. I'm going to do something different. Something practical. Sharon nodded slowly, as if waiting for the punchline. I already got a lease on a small place, I said. It's close to work. Nothing fancy. Just a place where the Wi-Fi isn't shared with someone who lied for 11 months straight. Her face twitched, barely. I'll be out by Sunday, I added. You can have the place. Keep the beige hallway. The cushions. The bookmarks. All of it. You're serious. I didn't print all your quotes just for craft night. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then opened it again. You're not even going to ask me why? No. Because I already know why. You wanted to feel something again. And instead of doing the work, you outsourced it to someone who complements your syntax. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. You didn't want to be lonely, so you built a tiny secret world where you weren't. Except it wasn't secret. And now it's not a world either. It's just a mess. She stood up, then sat back down. One of those restless movements meant to simulate action when no action is available. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. They never do. There was nothing left to say. Not really. She had pages and pages of potential monologues stored away, but the performance was over, and the lights were already off. I got up, went to the bedroom, and started packing. Not with rage. Not with sadness. Just with a sense of resolve. The kind you only get after watching something slowly unravel while everyone pretends the thread is decorative. Later that night, she knocked lightly on the doorframe. Are you sure? I looked up. I was sure 2 months ago. I just needed you to catch up. And that was our last real conversation. No tears. No shouting. Just Sharon, standing in a doorway she didn't know she'd closed too late. And me, folding t-shirts into a suitcase that didn't ask any questions. I didn't leave with a speech. No emotional send-off. No, take care of yourself on the way out. Just a handshake with the doorknob, 2 bags, and a lease signed on an apartment that had an air conditioning unit older than our marriage. Which, frankly, seemed more reliable at this point. Sharon was in the kitchen when I left. She didn't look up, didn't say anything, just kept staring at a mug like it owed her an explanation. I didn't ask if she needed anything. She already had everything she needed. A functioning washing machine, a closet full of sensible shoes, and a literary pen pal who probably thought he'd won a prize. The apartment was nothing to brag about. 1 bedroom. Carpet that made weird noises when I walked. The water pressure was aggressive in a way that felt personal. But it was mine. There were no throw pillows with passive messages stitched across them. No framed art with words like grateful or breathe. Just blank walls and the hum of appliances that didn't judge. First night there, I unpacked exactly 3 things: my toothbrush, a pair of jeans I actually liked, and the remote for the TV I brought from the old house. Everything else stayed in boxes. Not because I was sad, just because none of it seemed particularly urgent. It was like someone pressed the reset button and left me in the tutorial level. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my coworkers. Not my brother. Not even Gary, who's known me since high school and once helped me build a barbecue grill with instructions that may as well have been written in ancient code. I wasn't in the mood for the kind of sympathy that comes with long pauses and pity nods. I wasn't sick. I wasn't broken. I was just relocated. The funny part is, for all of Sharon's speeches about growth and authenticity, I was the one actually starting from zero. She got to keep the house, the couch, the life with the lamps I hated. I got a drawer that stuck, and a neighbor who practiced the trumpet at 6:30 a.m. with more confidence than skill. But it worked. Because there's a strange kind of clarity that shows up when there's no audience. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't pretending to be more understanding than I was. I didn't have to nod through someone's story about how they just needed to feel seen. I saw myself just fine now. Saw the part of me that had gone quiet over the last few years. The guy who used to fix things around the house not because it needed doing, but because it made him feel useful. The guy who used to enjoy reading the Sunday paper before Sharon started calling it a relic of outdated thought. That guy came back. Not all at once, but enough to be recognizable. 3 weeks in, I ran into Miles. It was at a bookstore, of course it was, and he was standing in front of a display table marked new and noteworthy, flipping through a paperback like it had personally offended him. I knew it was him. Same haircut that looked professionally neglected. Same posture of a man who believed his opinions were underappreciated. He didn't recognize me at first. Not until I was 3 steps away. Then he did a double take, the kind people do when they're trying to decide if they're being pranked. "George?" he asked, like I'd appeared from a fog. I smiled. "Miles. Thought you only existed in lowercase italics." He chuckled awkwardly, then adjusted his scarf. It wasn't cold. Just windy enough to make scarves a statement instead of a necessity. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "Same," I replied. "But you know how bookstores are full of regret and discount bins." He glanced around like he was checking for exits. "I just want to say I didn't mean for any of this to go the way it did." "That's great, Miles. But you're confusing me with someone who wants an apology." "Let me help you out," I interrupted. "You met a married woman who liked compliments. You thought you were having some kind of profound connection. She liked the attention. You liked being the alternative. And now here you are, stuck with the fact that you were a long intermission in a show that's already ended." He opened his mouth, probably to defend the romance of it all, but I kept going. "I'm not mad at you. Honestly, you're not special enough to be mad at. You're just a guy who read too much Vonnegut and thought being emotionally available made you interesting." He blinked like he hadn't been spoken to like that before. Probably hadn't. People like Miles tend to live in circles where everyone's very careful with words and feelings. I wasn't interested in being careful anymore. "So," I added, "you can keep writing sonnets in her inbox, or whatever it is you two do. But I'm out of that particular club." I left him there, still holding the book he hadn't bought, still wearing the scarf no one needed. I went home, sat on my rented couch, and made a list of things I hadn't done in years. It wasn't a dramatic list. Just regular things. Go to the movies alone without pretending it's sad. Fix the bike in the closet. Call Gary back. Try the weird bookstore downtown. Sit in silence without planning how to fill it. I crossed off 3 that weekend. A month later, Sharon texted. It was short. Just said, "Hope you're doing okay." I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Just because I didn't have anything else to say. Her story had ended in my world. She'd written the ending herself. I just edited the punctuation. So what did I learn? That's the question people love to ask, like every collapse has to come with a tidy moral. I didn't learn some grand truth about love or betrayal. I didn't discover a new version of myself that jogs at sunrise and drinks kale. What I got was something simpler, a reminder that being quiet doesn't mean being blind, that pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, and that the person most likely to lie to you with a smile is the one who doesn't want to admit they're already halfway gone. And now I sleep better. Not because the mattress is better, trust me, it's not, but because I'm not lying next to a performance. I wake up without the background noise of trying to guess who's real that day. Sharon kept the house, kept the cushions, kept her routine. Maybe Miles is still around. Maybe he's not. Doesn't matter. I kept my name, my time, my sanity. Not a bad deal, all things considered. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel